Hi guys, welcome back to another episode. This episode will be quite long since I want to and I will explain as many things as possible to educate you to become a smarter vintage watch collector. Generally, for first-time buyer or for anyone who is looking to build a nice collection. Everything that I will go through in this video probably took me more than a decade to learn and become who I am today. I've made countless of mistakes. I was tricked at the very start from experienced collector and dealer. I was indecisive on selecting that one perfect watch that will stay with me for the rest of my life, and I did not know how to tell if the watch is original or not. And guess what? You'll get to learn everything in this one video, all the important knowledge in one video for free. What I am about to teach you, nobody else in the industry would be willing to teach or reveal. Most collector or dealer don't even have these knowledge. I do not mind educating people because I know what I sell on my site are all properly serviced watches and there's nothing to hide. Product quality and good customer services are first in my checklist to running a successful business. Anyhow, enough of my introduction and let us get started. Collecting vintage timepieces is my passion and what I enjoy the most. The first thing that I tell someone who is looking to buy the first vintage timepiece is never to rush. Rush purchase is almost always a regretful purchase for a first-time buyer. Buying a vintage watch takes time. You must spend a lot of time to self-educate yourself before spending your hard-earned money on something that you'll enjoy and cherish for many, many years down the road. That said, do not try to go cheap and buy a watch just for the brand and not care about its condition or how it appears. What I mean by that is better to save up some money and buy a timepiece for its condition. Believe me, you'll save a lot of money on future maintenance. And when your watch looks great, you'll want to wear it every single day. I get this question all the time via email or on my Instagram direct messages. I am new to buying a vintage timepiece, and there are so many selection on your site. Can you help me to point out which is the best suitable piece for me? The answer to that is, I am not you and we have our personal preferences. So what I like may be different from what you like. Let us begin with the basic stuff when it comes to examining a timepiece in my perspective. By going through these few things will help you narrow down your selection a whole lot. After going through these few things, I'll explain the more advanced stuff later on in this video. Number one is the case material. Ask yourself, are you a solid gold person or someone who prefer to stick with a full steel case? Or even a combination of both metal known as a two-tone case. Note that a steel tone case may not be made of solid stainless steel. In some cases, the case may be made of white gold, platinum, aluminum, silver, or chrome plated. And on a gold case, the gold material may not always be solid gold, but can be just gold fill, gold plated, or gold cap. These are things you must consider and understand as they can affect the value of a watch a great deal. Number two is the calendar feature on the watch. Are you a person who requires a date on your watch, or you prefer to own a watch with a full dial without any date feature interference? Number three is the second-hand feature on the watch. There are two main types of second-hand watches. You can choose to own one with a center second-hand or one with a sub-dial second-hand, which means the second-hand is located at around the 6 o'clock. There are also a handful of watches that have no second-hand at all, similar to this Patek Philippe. Number four is the color tone of the dial, which is the face of the watch. This is the first thing that you'll see when you look at your watch. Pick the color that is most pleasant to your eyes, and remember that the color tone is not available in every color there is. The color tones on a dial are usually black, gold, champagne, silver, white, or some two-tone combination of the said color. One trick to know if the dial has been refinished or not is by looking at the color tone of the dial. For instance, on a 1950s Omega Constellation case model 2852, you'll never see a green dial on this watch. If you do, you'll know immediately that the dial has been refinished. Here are just a few examples of the available types of color tone dials. Number 5 is the color tone on the hour indexes and hands. After you have decided on the color tone of the dial, you can decide on the color tone of the hands and hour markers. Keep in mind that only on a full steel case watch that the hour indexes and hands may come in full steel tone to match the case, or they can also be in gold tone. But on a gold tone case, whether it is solid gold, gold cap, gold plated, or gold filled, the hour indexes and hands are always gold in color and never in steel tone. Number 6 is the case dimension. This is something that many first-timers regret after buying a vintage watch, thinking that it will be as big as some of the modern timepieces. Keep in mind that a vintage men's watch is normally around 32 mm to 36 mm wide, excluding the crown. If you are unsure whether the timepiece is too small for you or not, my suggestion is to best visit your local watch store and ask to try on a few of the 32 mm to 36 mm timepieces. Usually when you buy a watch online or through social media, the dealer or seller will provide a picture of the watch on his wrist, or you can always request for one. Best to ask him what size is his wrist so that you can get an idea of how large the watch may appear on your wrist. My wrist size is 6 inches, which is very small, so a lot of vintage watches will fit nicely on my wrist. Another thing to understand is that a sport or more casual watch is usually larger compared to a dress watch. There are large size vintage watches in the market, such as 37 mm to 42 mm. However, when it comes to buying anything oversized or jumbo size, it is best that you do plenty of research on those specific case model prior to buying one. These watches are usually in poor condition, such as missing case tube, case overly polished it, case internal damage, dial refinished it, hands been replaced, and the list goes on. So be careful. Number 7 on the list is to select the movement types. There are 3 main types of movement on a vintage watch. They are manual wind, automatic, self-wind, and quartz, also known as battery operated. I am not against quartz watches, but quartz is something that I highly do not recommend you to buy when it comes to a vintage timepiece. Vintage quartz watches usually take special types of battery, which are discontinued in today's market. The battery contain mercury and provide a different voltage. You can use modern-made battery, however, they usually do not last very long, and I would only suggest Renata as the brand to use. The other thing to keep in mind about vintage quartz watches is that their movement parts are obsolete and usually not repairable, which is mainly why they are the most affordable vintage watches in the market. Dealers are always jumping for joys whenever they can sell away their quartz watch. Anyways, the 2 types of movement that I recommend are manual wind and automatic. I would say a majority of people will prefer automatic over manual wind since you do not need to hand wind it on a daily basis. However, I myself prefer manual wind over automatic because I feel more connected to my watch whenever I wind it first thing in the morning prior to putting it on my wrist. You can hand wind an automatic watch as well, but it is not mandatory for you to if you are going to wear it daily, as the watch will self-wind itself while you move your wrists. Last but not least, the case design of the watch. There are three main types of case appearances. You have the rounded case, the square type, and also the long rectangular type. If your goal is to look for a square rectangular case, the selection are not very many, since these types of cases are hard to maintain if you are not a careful person. These type of cases usually do not take any case back gasket and crown gasket, which is why you seldom see nice square or rectangular watches available in the market. They are just not good against moisture. A person who owns a square or rectangular watch usually has more than one timepiece in their collection, and they will only wear it on special occasion. Now, round case, on the other hand, are the most common. However, you'll still need to spend some time to decide, since round case exists with a variety of case lugs design. After you have gone through these 8 steps and have decided on how you want your watch to appear, it is time to take it to the next level, where I will reveal and educate you on many helpful advices. Firstly, let us begin by selecting that one brand that you would like to focus on and purchase. For the purpose of this video, I'll choose Omega as the brand, since there's so much I can relate to and talk about. If you're not a watchmaker or some long-time collector, then I highly recommend you to avoid buying any project watches. You want to buy a watch that you can wear the moment you received it. After you have selected the brand, you want to narrow down by selecting a particular case design or model. And to make life even easier for yourself, select a decade for that model. This way you can focus, research, expand your knowledge to the fullest. Whether you are buying a watch online or at some auction or from a collector, do not let the term rare absorb you in any way. If you have done some research on the particular brand, the watch you are looking at is probably not rare at all. If the dealer only has a few Omega for sale, most likely they will be described as rare watches. I've seen too many kinds of vintage Omega, and believe me, I know what is rare and what is not. Rare does not always refer to the limited quantity production of the case model, but it could be referring to the dial variation or how excellent the condition of the watch is. And how can you tell if the dealer is an expert at what he or she is selling? Simply go through the inventory. If the dealer sells all kinds of brand name watches in his store, then I can pretty much guarantee that this dealer is probably not an expert. He may know much more than you do, but once you really ask for greater detail about a particular watch, you may get a false answer. Hence, if the watch shop is made up of a team, then there's a high chance their knowledge are well spread out, where each individual is an expert at 2 to 3 brands in their shop. But for one individual to know everything, I think that is much too difficult to achieve. Since you are unsure whether the dealer knows his material or not, you'll need to know a few advanced material yourself. So regardless of how the dealer describes his timepiece, you must examine the watch first using your own eyes. The very first thing that you'll need to look at is the dial condition and see whether it has been refinished or not. If the dial has been refinished, then most watch collector will not want it, since the value of the timepiece has dropped tremendously. Dial refinishing takes away not only the value of the watch, but the original factory finish of the watch, which is the main purpose of collecting a vintage timepiece. Believe it or not, if a dealer does not specialize on the brand that he is selling, he will not be able to tell you whether the dial is factory original or refinished for some of his watches. Which is why I only specialize on vintage Omega, because if you were to ask me whether the dial has been refinished on a different brand, I will have a difficult time to answer that question if the job is very well done. Omega, on the other hand, regardless of how professional the dial has been refinished, I will still be able to tell. Unfortunately, I will not be able to educate you guys on dial refinishing on this video. It would it would take way too long and will need its own separate video on just dial refinishing. But for now, let us focus on the condition of the dial. When a dial is poorly aged, then it does not matter how rare the case model is, the watch is not worth as much. A poorly aged dial could also mean that the watch was never well taken care of. After you have examined the dial, it's time to examine the hour indexes and hands. In rare occasion, dial indexes or dial markers may be missing or been replaced with similar ones. Here are 3 examples with missing hour indexes. I have seen a dial with just 1 hour index been replaced, and whoever did it did a very good job. But luckily, I did examine the watch thoroughly and noticed the slight difference. Here's an example, and as you can see, the bottom 2 hour indexes have been replaced. Once you compare them, you can see that the marker is actually a little wider and slightly shorter. With the hands, this is similar to dial refinishing, since you must know the brand very well in order to tell whether they are the correct set or not. For example, on a Constellation pie pen, if the set of hands are pointing further than the minute track, then you know they are replacement hands. Also, if the hands are index type instead of dial fin, then you know that these set of hands have been replaced as well. Keep in mind that the color tone of the hands will relate to the color tone of the hour indexes. If the hands are gold and the hour indexes are silver, this is a sign of hands replacement. If the hour indexes have luminous, then the hands will do too, and vice versa. The crystal of the watch is something I less worry about. Since most vintage watches that I buy, I will have to replace the crystal anyways. Whether the crystal is original or not will not affect the value of the watch a whole lot. Most importantly, you want a proper tight fitting crystal on your watch. And most of the time, the crystal is never the right fitting one, since I can almost always easily press the crystal out using my fingers when servicing a watch. Have a genuine signed crystal on your Omega does not mean it is the correct original crystal for the watch either. Almost all vintage watches will take acrylic type crystal. Don't plan on installing a mineral or sapphire crystal after you buy your watch. It will just sink into the case and damage the dial and the hands. Here are some examples of the types of crystal. The first 2 are low dome and high dome crystal, just regular crystal. And then the current 2 are crystal with metal tension ring. And the last one is a crystal with metal tension ring but has a step. And the step is just for, usually the step is there for watches with the calendar feature. Sometime when you buy a watch, the dealer will tell you that the watch has been serviced. One way to tell if he's telling you the truth or not is by looking at the crease of the crystal. If you see old sweat still remain on the case, on the crystal, well, around the crystal, then you know he's most likely not telling you the truth, because who would service a watch and not clean up the case? That's not a proper job. Case condition and case overall examination are the next step to inspect. As a serious collector, a case polish of any kind will not be exceptional, and of course will devalue the price of the watch. Let's just say a case polish is almost similar to a dial refinish but less stern. There are some collectors who will not mind a case polish if they really like the timepiece and the polish is professionally done, meaning all the edges and bevel are not polished away. If you're unsure how your watch is supposed to appear originally, it is best to do an online search for case comparison. Scratches and dings are not a major concern as they are part of the watch history. Of course, for deeper scratches, you do prefer to have them located on the case back rather than on the front of the case. Engraving is only acceptable to certain people. Engraving can give you a little history about the watch, such as who may the original owner be and what was his occupation, etc. The one major thing you want to avoid is case corrosion on the edges. This is usually located around the edges of the back side of the case body. When you close the case back, you can still see part of the case back gasket showing. The case bezel is next on the list when examining the case. Depending on the case model, many watches will take a removable case bezel. There are usually two types of case bezel issue. One is the bezel is missing, and two, there's a crack on the bezel. When the bezel is still on the case, it is usually higher than the lugs, and in most cases have a bevel that goes down to meet the lugs. Crack on the bezel is more difficult to spot since certain old watches are very dirty to begin with. A watch with a missing or cracked bezel will become a project watch for many years. The case tube is the last thing to examine since it is not the most important issue to first inspect. Usually when the crown is correct on the watch, then the case tube is there on the case. Usually, older manual wind watches will come with missing case tube or with a wrong replacement case tube. So regardless of fitting a new case back gasket and proper crystal, moisture and other particle can still enter the watch if the case tube is missing. Note that moisture can still enter the watch with the right case tube if the crown gasket is no good. Actually, there's one last thing. As a bonus, original box and papers do not make your watch factory original. Original papers do not tell you whether the dial has been refinished or if the hands have been replaced or reloomed. To me, if the watch comes with its original box and papers, I would consider them as bonuses. Remember, knowledge is key. That's the end of this video. I really hope that you guys have learned something from this video. It took me countless amount of hours to produce this 20+ minute long video. I will continue to make more educational video on my YouTube channel. So please support this channel by clicking on that like button and subscribe to the channel if you have not yet done so. If you have any question or comment, please leave them in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next video.